Each summer and fall, visitors flock to Cape Cod for its sunlit beaches and wild coastline. But another visitor arrives with the season. The sharks are here. In 2025, we mark a milestone that still echoes through the waves. The 50th anniversary of Jaws. This iconic film not only captured our imaginations, but also made us think twice before stepping back into the water. Lewis Pugh, who is head of his own foundation, swims all over the world to bring awareness to challenges facing our oceans.
I have always wanted to do a swim to talk about sharks, just how important they are to a healthy ocean. And the 50th anniversary of Jaws, it felt like really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to try and change that narrative. Because, Jaws portrayed sharks as villains out to get us. And we know they are nothing of the sort. They are absolutely essential for a healthy ocean. They keep the ocean in balance. But they are seriously, seriously threatened. And so this was a swim. It was a 12-day swim around the whole of Martha's Vineyard, which is obviously where much of the Jaws movie was filmed.
We want to improve the public's understanding and really work to foster a deeper understanding and appreciation for the vital role that white sharks play in our marine ecosystem.
I've got so much joy out of swimming in the ocean, and when you actually see a great white shark, it's an amazing thing, but it's also a sign of a healthy ocean. And I want people to go to places like Cape Cod and to be able to see these magnificent animals. I mean, the numbers are just really terrifying. So on average, globally, 274,000 sharks are killed every single day. I mean, just think about that number. It's really hard to get your mind around that number, but globally, on average, 274,000 sharks are killed every single day. You multiply that over a whole year, it's 100 million sharks killed every single year. It's complete madness. And it will eventually lead to a complete breakdown in the health of our oceans. We just can't carry on like this.
Lewis Pugh's passion for swimming was ignited as a teenager growing up in South Africa.
So I went to a school and it overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, and in the distance I could see Robben Island. And a friend had swum Robben Island, and so I really also wanted to do it. And I got some training lessons, and then I got a boat out to Robben Island. And I remember Robben Island was where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. And then I did the swim back. So that was my first swim. And I remember it as if it was yesterday, because I was very, very thin in those days. And the water's pretty cold. So for the first hour, I kind of held it together. By the end of the second hour, though, I was really cold. After 2.5 hours, the team were taking bets about how long before I gave up. Anyway, I was stuck in there, and 3 hours. After 3 hours, I finally put my feet down on the sand, and what a joyful feeling. And at that moment, I realized I had fallen in love with swimming.
His love for swimming also gave him an appreciation for the world's oceans. So how did Lewis Pugh chart his course through this complex landscape as he prepared for his swim around Martha's Vineyard?
One of the ways I do this is I pack the team full of courageous people. Courage is completely contagious. So if I've got somebody in the team who is really courageous, then it makes it all the more easy to get in the water and do the swim. It's interesting that there have been a number of swims which I have done where halfway through I think to myself, good Lord, am I ever going to get to the end of the swim? Will I ever make it? And it actually turned out to be one of the toughest swims I have done in 40 years. Also, it was long. 12 days is a long swim. The water was cold. But we went, it ended up that the swim started the day before a really big storm came through. And I always train for tough conditions, but I've never, ever experienced 10 days of really, really bad weather. So the first day of the swim was fantastic and beautiful. The last day was magnificent, but it was 10 days of swimming into big waves, and some days covering just a mile. Swam as hard as I could for as long as I could, and I just got 1 mile in the right direction. And then I think the last thing which makes it kind of challenging is, Cape Cod has become a global hotspot for great white sharks, and so you're constantly thinking about what's beneath you.
With the growing seal population that we've seen as a result of the Marine Mammal Protection Act enacted in 1972, we've had over half a century of protection of seal populations in the U.S. and Canada. And they are now coming back to what we believe are pre-existing levels, right? Many of us don't recall seals being here in big numbers because they were wiped out long before we were alive. So seals are back, and in response to the growing seal population, white sharks have taken notice. We've demonstrated this over the last decade plus. And so they're hunting in our nearshore shallow areas.
And I mean, there are so many seals now off Cape Cod. I mean, during this swim, there were a number of times when I was swimming, and then had lots of seals in the water. And, when you're swimming, you want to say to them, okay, it's wonderful, because they're so joyful seals and they're so playful in the water. But that where there's seals, there will be sharks nearby, because that's their primary diet. And so I remember during the swim, wanting to say to the seals, okay, can you just move a little bit further away?
So sharks are a really fascinating species in a lot of ways. They've got a really long evolutionary history. A lot of them are top predators and play a really important role in ecosystem structure and function. And they're just amazing animals, and they really hold a big place in the public's imagination, especially when you talk about white sharks. I think when you hear the word shark, everybody thinks of a white shark, right? But there's been so much misinformation about them in the media. They're not these mindless killing machines that way people often think of them.
When I grew up as a kid watching shark documentaries, watching Jaws, every time you see a shark on TV, it's doing something scary, right? It's eating something, it's menacing something, or lurking somebody's beaches. But it's important to remember that this is sharks' homes, right? And they're natural predators just out there hunting for their natural prey items. So they're also just animals. They're just big fish out there looking for their next meal.
The swim just got so much media attention everywhere, from all the way in Australia, right the way to Hawaii. And I was getting so many interviews. And so all day long, I'm talking about sharks, and then ultimately I've got to get in the water and do the swim. Then it becomes quite hard to actually turn it off. And we've always had a cardinal rule in our team, and that is we never talk about sharks, because then you can psych yourself out of the water. But on this swim, I wanted to talk about sharks, and so that's what made this swim particularly tough. So what we would do is I would get in the water and I would swim as hard as I could in that tide. So one day it was so bad, all I covered was 1.9 kilometers. I mean, it was the most depressing day. Yeah, and on another day I covered 17 kilometers. So everything depended upon the tide and just how bad the storm was. Remember, I said we went into a 10-day storm. That's what made it so hard. But there's nothing more depressing than swimming for a whole hour and covering, barely a mile, and nothing more joyful than getting in the water and you've got the current and you've got the tide behind you, even though they're big wild seas, and you cover 16, 17 kilometers. but there are some times when you think, good Lord, are we actually going to make this?
I just will also note that a lot of folks, they like to blame the movie Jaws for the decline in white sharks and other shark species. There was definitely an interest in shark fishing that ramped up after the movie, but across the board, there were increases in fishing efforts before that time because sharks were actually considered an underutilized resource and fishermen were encouraged to fish for them. And then the movie just kind of let fuel to the fire.
I mean, if you watch Jaws, you would have thought that their number one thing on their menu are humans, but that's not the case.
And what we know about white sharks now is they live a really long time. They live to be over 70 years old. They don't start having babies until their 20s and 30s. And so the population has declined really dramatically, but it's been making a comeback.
I mean, I loved swimming. And I loved being a pioneer swimmer. I loved attempting swims which had never, ever been done before. I have a big atlas here at home and I got it open. I'm constantly looking at places where I could do a swim. You know, I was looking at this cape or that sea or this peninsula. Could I do a swim around it or you know, across it? And these places are often very, very remote places and they're formidable places. And so one does have to get a grip of one's fear. So I've been swimming now for nearly 40 years, and over that period of time, I really have seen the oceans change. The biggest changes I've seen have been in the polar regions with the melting of the ice, but also in warm areas of the world. I've seen the enormous impact which the climate crisis is, for example, having on coral reefs. And so there came a time when I put my passion of swimming together with my desire to talk about these issues together. And so now I only do swims to try and shine a light on parts of the world which really do need to be protected.
And that sounds good. I mean, I'm totally on board with that. I also love to swim in the ocean. And when I talk to the local shark experts, they say that the great whites, they like to swim in water that's, less than 15 feet deep. And that gives me pause. And I think for places like Cape Cod, when it impacts economics, we basically shut down in the winter. And so the summer tourism is what puts food on people's table. We want to give them the information, but the information is really these sharks are swimming with you.
At the time when Jaws was made in 75 and came out, we really knew, the scientific community on a global scale knew very, very little about this species.
I think if you've spent any time on YouTube or any social media platform, you've probably seen these kinds of videos pop up. And as drone technology has become more accessible and affordable, and people are flying drones around everywhere, they're seeing sharks in the ocean, which a lot of people see videos like this and they're kind of, oh my gosh, there was a shark right there. How did something not happen? But it's important to keep in mind that these technologies are really just illuminating what these sharks have always been doing. Anytime humans overlap in areas where there are predators hunting for their natural prey item, right, there is a potential for somebody to have a bad interaction with a shark, for a shark to bite somebody, right? And so, but the best thing people can do is be aware. If people don't know that sharks are hunting for seals in shallow water off hard beaches, how can they modify their behavior to reduce the risk of having a bad interaction?
No, I know, and you don't want to frighten people, and so we really do need to put everything into perspective. I mean, if you think about the number of encounters between humans and sharks globally each year, it is such a small number.
When we had a series of negative interactions over the last decade, in particular in 2018, we started shifting our focus to fine-scale behavior. We want to try to get an answer to the question of when, where, and how white sharks feed on their natural prey, seals. We firmly believe, as much of the scientific community believes, is that when a white shark bites a person, it is likely a mistake.
people when the results of that population study came out and they heard that 800 sharks had visited our waters in a 4-year period. There were a lot of people who were really afraid of that number and really worried about what that meant. And the same goes for the results where we found that sharks are spending about half of their time in water that's 15 feet deep or less, because everybody's mind automatically goes to Jaws, honestly, where they're like, there's a lot of sharks out there. They do represent a public safety risk, but what is the actual risk? So like Greg mentioned, we are using a lot of new technologies to spy on these animals, learn more about their behavior at this point. We want to learn how they're using the waters off of our beaches and how they're hunting for seals. We have watched a lot of sharks swimming around, doing nothing remotely scary, investigating things, getting spooked by things. This is a shark that we saw actually go up to the surface. You could see she was swimming along the bottom and she goes up to the surface to check something out. These are very curious fish.
I hope we can really reshape the narrative about sharks. As I said, sharks are absolutely crucially important. I mean, they're also incredible animals. I mean, they've been around since before the dinosaur. They've survived 5 mass extinctions. They're incredible animals, and they are seriously threatened. So I really hope that, because this was just one swim, I now need to carry this message to other parts of the world which have threatened shark populations, to India, to the Philippines, to South Africa, to Kenya, to many, many parts, to Indonesia, to many, many parts of the world where sharks are really under threat, and urge policymakers to protect them.
So a lot of folks think that white sharks are completely new visitors to our waters, that it's a new thing, that it's related to climate change, but we know from historical catch records and the available data that were out there that white sharks are a natural part of our ecosystem here. They've long occurred in Massachusetts water.
So we're studying their movements and behavior here so we can provide that information to the public, to the towns, to the people managing shark-related public safety information at the beaches, so they can use the results of the research to inform public safety practices related to the presence of these large predators right off of our beaches. But it's really important to keep in mind that sharks are not hunting for humans. People aren't on the menu. They are here to feed on their natural prey items, and they're very skilled, cautious predators. But anytime you enter the water off the beaches of Cape Cod in the summer and fall, you need to be aware of their presence and the fact that they're hunting for seals in shallow water close to shore.
So no matter how hard the day has been, when I go down to the little beach near me called Whitsand Bay and I dive into the sea, the world really does seem perfect. And I love swimming. I hope to swim until the last day of my life.